Hello everyone, I'm Reza from RedaCAD, and today I'm going to show you a very simple trick of how to calculate the previous dynamic period using Power BI and DAX. By the previous dynamic period, I mean not the previous year, not the previous month, not the previous quarter, but the previous dynamic period based off the selection of the slicer that you got. Like for example, if in the slicer I select only, let's say, this period, which is 190 days, and this method is going to calculate what is 190 days before this period and calculate the sales of the value or whatever that I have in that previous dynamic period. Let's go and check it out. To implement this example, I'm using AdventureWorks dataset, which you can download it from the links provided in the blog below. And from the AdventureWorks dataset, I'm using fact internet sales, which has the sales transaction information and the date table. Which has one record per day. It's important that you have a date table for your date calculations. There is a default date table in Power BI. You can use that too. In this example, I'm using my own custom date table, so my calculation would be based on that. To make sure that these two tables are related to each other, after loading those, I'll go and create the relationship between fact internet sales and dim date based on date key and order date key. So date key and order date key connection is created, as you can see. Let me zoom in a little bit as well. So yeah, based on order date key and date key, these are related. Now it is important, if you are using your own date dimension, to go to the date table in the modeling tab and mark it as a date table. Otherwise, Power BI is going to create another date table under that date table as well. I've explained a full article about what is difference between a custom date table and a built-in date table in Power BI. For this example, I'm going to use a custom date table. Also, you can use your own, you can use the built-in date table for this example as well. So I'll mark it as a date table. And you have to select a column that is a full date column. In this case, it's full date alternate key. So I click on that and my date table is ready. Now, to show how this example works, I'm going to first create a slicer based on the full date. And because it's a date slicer, it's going to be a range slicer. I'm also going to create a number of card visuals, like one card visual to show the total sales. So I'm searching for sales amount. Yep, here it is. So this would be the total sales within the period. And as you already know, everything in Power BI is dynamic. So if I change the period, this is going to be sales of that period. What we are going to achieve in this example is that I'm going to also detect what is the previous period based on this period. Like if this period is like 100 days, then I want to see what is the sales in 100 days ago and compare it with this period, right? Now to do that, I'm doing it step by step, one step at a time, so you can understand what is the DAX calculation logic behind it. But you can do all in one measure if you want to, right? My first step is to find out what is the starting date, what is the end date, what is the days in this period. Then based on that, I detect the start date and end date of the previous period and calculate it. Now I'm doing it based on some measures. Again, you can do all in one. I'm just doing it to as multiple steps to make it easier to understand. Okay, this is going to be start of this period for me. So the start of this period is very simple calculation of first date. First date is giving you the first date in that list of dates. So first date of full date alternate key, which is the date field in my dataset. This is going to be the start date. Now to show it here, I'm bringing it as another card visual, a new card visual for a start of this period. And you can see this is the start of this period, which if I changed it, you'll see that the start of this period is changing. If you want the time part of this to be gone, you can always go and go to the formatting of that field and change it to whatever format you like, but that's not the important part of this calculation. So I calculated the first date. I'm going to do the same thing for the let's say end date or end of this period. So that would be again another measure. Let's call this one end of this period. For that one we used a start date. For this one we use last date. So last date of full date alternate key. It's important that you specify a full date field here, and it's coming from a date table that has no gaps and all sorts of information related to a date table. So I'm putting that end of this period also as another card visual right beside these, just to show you how this is working. Now, if I change the end of period, you'll see that this is showing me end of period, that is showing me a start of period. Now, a very simple calculation between these two would be the number of days in these periods. So I'll do that again as another measure. Let's call it days in this period. So days in this period, that can be simply this minus that. But if you want to have two dates fields deducted from each other, one of the best way to do that is using a function called dateDiff. And with dateDiff, I can say, okay, give me the dateDiff of start date of this period, end of this period, and interval is day. You can have different intervals. I put just some control inters to make this code a little bit more readable, like this. Right? You can use things like DAX formatter to make it better formatted as well. So days in period would be this minus that. Basically, I give it the number of days, and I put that as another card visual. Oops, sorry, not making the slicer card visual, creating a new card visual, and putting days in period in that. So here you can see that how many days I have in this period, and if I change the period, that also changes based on that. Now that we have the days in period, we know the start of this period, we know the end of this period, we can easily calculate the previous period. Now to calculate the previous period, I'll do one step at a time. One thing about DAX understanding is that you can always write calculation in many different ways. This way that I'm showing to you is not the only way that is possible for doing this calculation. You might find many other ways to do that. So let's go through this. I'll do that again with different measures, like one measure for, I would call it end of the previous period. Now, end of the previous period is one of the most simple one in this calculation, because when I know what is the start of this period, if I deduct one day from that, that would be end of the previous period. Like, for example, if this period starts from 1st of July, the previous period should end at 30th of June. The reason is that I don't want to double count this date again. So one way to do that is really simple. I can say whatever start of this period is minus 1. That would give me a day before. And I show that here as another card visual. So start end of the previous period. So as you can see here, whatever the start of the previous period is, and end of previous period is going to be a day before. Like this is 3rd of July. This is going to be 2nd of July. Now, when I know the end of previous period and I know how many days I have in the period, calculating the start of this start of the previous period is also simple. So I'll do that. That would be this minus that many days. So start of the previous period and that would be end of the previous period minus days in this period. Because we already calculated those, so it makes it really simple. I'll create another card visual here showing the start of the previous period. So end of previous period, start of previous period, and you don't really need this, but in case you want to see do you have exactly that many days in your period, you can do another calculation. We don't really need that, but I'm just for doing the testing, I'm just showing to you here. So this is going to be this days in previous period, which is the date diff of the start of the previous period and end of the previous period. Again, you don't really need that, but it's a calculation that gives you a peace of mind sometime to show in the user environment as well. So I'll bring that as another card visual, and this is going to be days in the previous period, which should be exactly similar to days in this period, right? And now that I have all of these, my final calculation would be the sales of the previous period, which would be this. So I can use a simple calculate function for that. So let's call it sales in previous period. I can say calculate sum of the sales amount. Because I have the start and end, one of the functions that works really good for this is dates between. If I had only one of the parts, start or end, and the number of days, dates in period would be also an option. I'm using this dates in between, dates between. I have explained an article fully about what is dates between, what is dates in period, what is their differences. You can go and check it out in our Redicat website. So the date here is going to be my full date field. All time intelligence functions needs the full date. The start date is going to be a start of the previous period. End date is going to be end of the previous period. And that is that simple to do the calculation. If you didn't want to create those extra measures, you could have done this with having like variables in this specific measure as well. So calculate sum of sales amount when the dates between start and end of the previous period for that specific date field. Now going to check it out, I'll bring the card visual here for sales in the previous period. And here it is. Now you can change this and see how it is working. Right? So if I have 146 days in my period, this is going to be the previous 146 days. If I am going to change it to whatever, it's going to be always the previous number of days that I have in my period. So here you go, simple DAX calculations of how to calculate previous period dynamically based on the selection in the slicer using DAX and Power BI. If you like this video, go ahead and subscribe to our YouTube channel. We will have more Power BI videos frequently, and check out all other videos that we have and our website in Redicat. Thank you.